Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Grace Song, and I'm the Executive Director of the Usuli Institute. And I am so excited to be here for this event. We had a wonderful event here in this space last night with Noam Chomsky and Chris Hedges and Dr. Abou El Fadl. And Hub925 was so kind and gracious to let us have this space to have another special event just for Muslims in the Bay Area. And we've had a couple of these events before. They're really special, and I'm praying that this will be a really magical evening, because it's an opportunity for us to engage with Dr. Abou El Fadl and ask him questions that, first let me ask this. How many people are familiar with Dr. Abou El Fadl and his work and his approach? Okay. And how many people have heard of the Usuli Institute? Are familiar with what we're doing? Okay, well that's good. That's most people. But for those who are not familiar, we are actually a new nonprofit organization with 501c3 status. We're an educational institute, and we are dedicated to elevating knowledge and critical thinking, and especially with regard to Islamic law and Sharia and Islamic jurisprudence. And we do that through something we call the Usuli method. And that is where we begin with the fundamentals of our faith, the Quran and the Sunnah, and the Islamic intellectual tradition. And then we delve into that tradition and try and investigate and extract the moral lessons and the moral principles of our faith. Those are the things that are timeless that we can then carry forward and apply to our modern day. So then that way Islam becomes a very vibrant, meaningful, relevant, and humanistic engagement with the divine. And we do things a little bit differently. I mean, we like to pride ourselves on tackling issues that maybe other Muslim organizations are not comfortable tackling or don't want to tackle for whatever reason. So, for example, we have held conversations with, we had one with Salam al-Mariadi of MPAC, and with Professor Khaled Abou speaking about Islamophobia in power. We had an event with Tariq Ramadan's daughter, where we actually had her on the live stream with us, and we were able to have her tell us about what's going on with the Tariq Ramadan issue, which is very controversial. And then we had another event where we had a conversation with Heather Laird, who is a Muslim health expert, and we talked about very controversial topics that have to do with mental health, suicide, the development of the brain, and that kind of thing. And then aside from that, we also do halaqas where we go back and we delve into the meaning of the Quran to really understand what the moral principles of our faith are. Now, last night we had the opportunity to really explore with three incredible brains what's happening in the world, and especially how challenging it is for Muslims, out in the world. And I was hoping that tonight we would shift gears a little bit and look inward and have a chance to talk about some of those things that affect our faith and our heart and our soul. And this is very unusual in that we see that Muslims are in crisis right now, and we know that many people are leaving the faith. They have questions about the faith and how it is relevant to the problems and the challenges that we face in 2018. And I'm hoping that this is one of those opportunities where we can feel free to ask any question that you might be either afraid or uncomfortable asking anywhere else. And if you've seen Dr. Abou El Fadl and how he tackles questions, you know that no question is off limits. And so one of the things, so I wanted to tell you first, though, in introducing the Usuli Institute and our work, is to kind of tell you a little bit about us personally, because to understand an institution and understand the efforts, it's important to know the people that are involved and and what they stand for. So just to let you know a little bit about me, I am a convert of about 24 years, and I actually am always proud to say that I converted to Islam before I met Dr. Abou El Fadl. And I grew up here in the Bay Area, so it's kind of nice being back. I grew up in Palo Alto, I went to school at Berkeley, and then I went to business school at Cornell University. And that's actually where I was introduced to Islam. I had a couple of classmates there, and one of them prayed 5 times a day, and I was like, wow, what would make someone pray 5 times a day? I mean, that was such an act of devotion. And it got me very intrigued, because growing up here in Silicon Valley, in the Bay Area, and my parents are here, who are Taiwanese immigrants, we sort of grew up, I grew up really revering white culture and the material culture. that America really touts. And so success for me was very much about getting a good education and getting a good job and making a lot of money, and really kind of imbibing those white values of privilege. And I think that really came to a head for me when I went to Cornell, because now I was surrounded by very smart people all on the same track, trying to figure out how they can make more money and get a better job and all of that. And that actually made me question, is that really all there is? And I have always been sort of a seeker of meaning and purpose, and what is my purpose here, and what's going to happen to me after I die. And so that was kind of the time in which I thought, okay, I'm going to start exploring faith. And I went to the Cornell Library and I checked out a book on Islam, and I started reading, and I started praying, talking to God, reflecting. And it took about 2.5 years before I actually made the jump to convert. But the thing that I wanted to share, well, let me just do a couple of quickies. So after I converted, I had never stepped foot in a mosque, so I really hadn't met many Muslims. And I decided, okay, time for me to go meet my people. So of course I was in New Jersey at the time, and I started hearing, I would go to the mosque and I would start hearing the khutbahs and the classes, and I started hearing really strange things, and it was like, okay, one, as a woman, you're not supposed to interact with men, and that, I have to wear hijab, of course, because if I don't wear hijab, I'm not a good Muslim. I had to kind of keep my eyes to the floor, and, it was a very, spiritually and intellectually oppressive message. And even, silly things like, okay, well, as Muslims, we're not supposed to eat pork, so we're not supposed to wear, pigskin on our shoes either. And it would be like, well, okay, wait a minute, but I don't understand, why is it that I can't wear shoes? The prohibition has to do with eating pork. So it was, for a convert, everything comes through the lens of questioning, because, as a convert, you really don't bring any preconceived notions when you are looking into Islam. And what I wanted to do actually is to kind of start the conversation by sharing things, inviting you to look through the lens of a convert. Because tonight I'm part of asking questions and thinking about our faith and how is it meaningful for us is useful when you start thinking in terms of the first Muslims, the people who kind of came with no preconceived notions and were starting to learn about faith. And that's what converts actually are today, is sort of modern day first Muslims. And it's a nice way to think about, how do I sort of question what I already assume about this religion, and what really holds true, and and what is worth questioning again. So back to my story. So I kind of was in this zone for about almost a year of just kind of going to the mosque and meeting Muslims and just being new and being a convert, not really being able to determine okay, what is authentic and what's not. And after about a year of that, I came back here to my 10-year high school reunion, and I met up with Asifa Qureshi, who some of you may know. She's part of the Qureshi camp here, and she and I went to high school together. And she gave me the lecture tapes of Dr. Abou El Fadl. And at that time I was working at Johnson & Johnson in brand management. I had graduated from business school. And so I was, happy to come back and kind of see life again. I started listening to these lecture tapes. And by then, because I felt very spiritually sort of stagnated and oppressed and not really realizing that, when I heard the lecture tapes from Dr. Abou El Fadl, it blew me away, because his approach was, okay, God gave us a brain, God gave us an intellect. We need to investigate, what does God really want from us? And how do we live in this time frame, in this life, questioning everything and not being afraid to question. And so I was completely blown away, and I said, I have to find out where this person is, and I have to learn from him. So I found out he lived 10 minutes from me in Princeton, New Jersey, and then I got in contact, and that's how we met. So we've been married now for about 23 years, I guess. And I like to always tell this story because I feel like what we do at the Usuli Institute, I have a very personal stake in it. Because I don't know if I would be a Muslim today if I did not encounter that approach, which we call the Usuli approach, which is really trying to understand, okay, well, what does it mean when we say Islam is about love and compassion and mercy and justice? What does that mean for 2018? What does that mean for me as a Muslim here? And that's what we try to really tackle in what we do at the Usuli Institute. So The other thing that I wanted to mention, because the voice that I bring in, Dr. Abou El Fadl is a world-renowned scholar, as you know, and what I tried to bring to the Usuli Institute is sort of the lens of the convert and the lens of a woman and an American. And it's like we struggle with so many issues as Muslims today. And the challenge, the thing that I've learned about converts, which is fascinating to me, is that every single person, because it's so difficult to become a Muslim today, I've noticed that as I've met converts, every single convert has had divine intervention in their journey to becoming Muslim. And you can understand that because if you were to start out today, let's say that you were not Muslim, and you have to ask yourself, I ask myself, would I be a Muslim today if I were starting this journey again? I mean, 24 years ago, it was before 9/11, it was already hard. People thought that Muslims were crazy enough as it was. And I certainly, dealt with a lot of challenges and my family and friends accepting that I made this decision. But today it is so much more difficult. And it's difficult to convert, but it's also difficult to remain a Muslim. And so we have to kind of ask the question, why? And what is it that will take, what will it take for us to re-engage with our tradition and fall in love with our tradition again? And I think that converts actually hold the key to this, because if you start this journey and you're really starting from a negative point of view, right? You're starting with this position of every Muslim is a potential terrorist or crazy, or there's just something off about them. But somehow converts are able to do the work, to learn about the faith, to overcome those perceptions and challenges, and somehow convince themselves over time that this is worth sacrificing friends and family and public opinion and all of the things that come with being Muslim. I mean, you are choosing this faith. That takes a lot of hard work, it takes a lot of knowledge, a lot of prayer, a lot of commitment, and that harkens back to the first Muslims. When this was the first message that people had. And I always ask myself, born Muslims, would they be willing to make those same sacrifices that converts have? Do they do the hard work to understand what this faith has to say? Are they okay with giving up family and friends and sacrificing, the public perception of them for this faith? And would they remain this faith despite all of the challenges? And for me, I can say 100%, I would not give this up for the world, because my understanding from this approach, the Usuli approach, has been empowering and uplifting, and it's amazing. But it's not what every Muslim understands about this faith. And I think if people had that conviction and that passion that arises from knowledge and from building a relationship with God, things would change dramatically. And the funny thing is, I've never said this before, but this sort of occurred to me. Converts, they struggle with a lot because they come to the faith and they expect, you've done all of this hard work. And it's like, oh my God, I found the meaning of life and I'm so excited. And you get to the mosque and it's like, there's no welcoming party. There's no person to help you get up to speed. If anything, I think people, they say, oh, mashallah, alhamdulillah, God gave you a gift. It's such a blessing that you were chosen. And then they disappear. And you're largely on your own. And we all know converts that are completely on their own, asked to make their way. And I feel like part of the reason why converts get that reaction is because Muslims themselves are ashamed of their faith. And they look at people who convert and come and they're like, why would you do that? You can't say you're not Muslim anymore, right? I mean, this is your family, this is your ethnicity, this is your culture. For converts, no, none of that. We don't have family that were Muslim. We don't have any connection to certain cultures. Everything for us is a question. Why? Why is this the right way? Why is this the best way? Why does God want this from us? And what does it mean to be a good Muslim? That is the perspective that people need to embrace in order, I think, to turn things around in this faith. And so I invite everyone to let go of if you're a born Muslim, let go of the assumptions that you think you have, and trust in learning and doing the hard work. Others of us were able to come here and get here, and we are passionate, and we are committed to making a change. And, I think that if you imagine all the converts in the world that have had divine interventions, that have done the hard work, that are not afraid to give up things that are comfortable for them, and to stand up for a faith that they believe in. That is what is going to take to bring Islam forward. And what is that also going to mean? That we are the best at what we do. Muslims were supposed to be at the forefront of everything. And, you know, this space, for example, is so apropos for this evening because, you know, seeing what is here, if you haven't had the chance to walk around and see what's in Hub925, it's state of the art. It's like cutting edge, you know, and this is what should be the future of Islam. So I invite you tonight to think about your hardest questions that you don't feel comfortable asking anywhere else, that you are fearful for asking. You know, one of the most important things the professor taught me when we first met is there is no embarrassment in religion. This is your right. This is your faith. And you should investigate the difficult questions. I recently learned about someone who got kicked out of one of the Muslim institutions because that person asked too many questions. You know, we are in a community where people don't want to answer difficult questions, either because they can't or they have political reasons. That is not how it should be. And, you know, we have to be different. We have to add value. We have to lead humanity because we're smart, we're brave, and, you know, we're articulate. And I think that converts need to step up. Converts are polite. You know, they believe that everyone else already got here first and they know better. That's actually not true. Am I right? So,
most of the time.
Most of the time. But anyway, so I wanted to share with you, I'm sorry for this very long introduction, but I really wanted to set the stage because it's hard for people to recognize or think that you can enter a space and ask any question you want, like literally any question you want. And if we don't have, if Dr. Abou El Fadl doesn't have, I mean, well, I'm not going to obviously answer that, but it's like, you know, no fear, feel empowered and liberated. This is what gave me a lot of strength and allowed me to find, you know, my love for Islam and what I hope that I can pass on to my children and others in the future. So thank you very much. And so Zachary and I are going to be moderators, and we actually, you know, this is going to be an evening for you and what's on your mind and the things that put doubt in your heart. And, you know, so please feel free to ask any question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace, for that eloquent introduction and heartfelt words, which I resonate with. So much of what you described, I've experienced myself. And thank you, Professor Abou El Fadl, for joining us. It's an honor and pleasure to have you both here. And thank you all for attending. I'm excited that this can be a sort of collaborative learning experience where your questions, your concerns, and your knowledge even can solicit answers from our scholar. So please, I'll open it up to the crowd, and we may have some questions as we go along, but welcome all of you. Yes.
You know, I told Grace that as the years go by, it gets harder and harder to follow her. It's true. I actually, I remember in a long time ago when Sheikh Muhammad Ghazali Rahimahullah was still alive, and he had visited the United States once and had developed a very negative view of the trajectory of Islam in the US. And he very clearly, and this was before I came to the United States, this was before 1982, he had said to me that Islam remains an immigrant phenomenon. And wherever Islam took root and has not become a native phenomena, it failed. An immigrant phenomena remains an ethnicity, and an ethnicity sooner or later clashes with nationalisms that elicit genocidal tendencies in the majority towards the minority. So if you look at Malaysian Islam, Indonesian Islam, Filipino Islam, it's rooted natively. A long time ago, I was invited, and this connects with what Grace was saying. I was invited to an ISNA conference, and I did something that was naughty, in the way that I was raised, perhaps, I'm not sure. Anyway, I asked people around the room who are converts to raise their hands. And there were about 100 people in the audience. Of course, in the ISNA conference, you have somewhat of a captive audience that come to your lecture. I'm sure they didn't come for me. They just came because they were told to fill the rooms. And out of the 100, about 3 or 4 raised their hands. And I said, this is the proof that Islam so far in the US is a failure. I was never invited to ISNA again. Until now, I've never been invited to ISNA again. Actually, they canceled my lecture the next day and had a rap instead. Unfortunately, this is the truth. I mean, the type of sacrifices people like me, and maybe some of you, most of us that come to the United States, and let's be very blunt about it and honest, most of us as immigrants come for financial opportunities. A few of us, when they made the commitment to Islam, they understood that they could end up in prison, tortured, disappeared. But that's not the majority of immigrants. The majority of immigrants that come to the West, many of them discover their Islamic identity after the immigrant phenomenon, not before the immigrant phenomenon. They become committed Muslims as part and parcel of their identity. So the type of sacrifices that people like me would think about, we would think in very brutal terms, that we might be arrested and tortured and killed. But the type of universe that Grace is talking about, where you are really making a magical commitment, to borrow a term from yesterday, a commitment towards an aspiration of beauty, where you want to grow into beauty. You are not thinking about people who will torture you. You're not thinking about people who are going to kill you. You're not thinking about Shahada as, well, alhamdulillah, if I attain Shahada, that's wonderful. That would actually be the best scenario, is for people like me, as I'm sure some of you know, we would think that if they are kind enough to just kill me, I'll be very grateful, because the alternative is torture. But that is not, and that's something I learned very quickly after I came to the United States, that converts come from a very different universe. And I'm telling you, now, since 82, whatever year we're in now, I don't keep count. Converts should be in the leadership. Converts should be paving the way for Islam. People like me should be playing nothing more than a consulting role on technical points of fiqh. But the vision should come from them. They should be on the podiums. They should be giving the Jum'ahs. They should be giving the Sunday lectures. Because they are anchored in the mores and the history, in the collective historical legacy of Western society. Most of us, I had to work extremely hard to learn English. But till today, things like the aesthetics of Western culture are alien to me. My heart will skip a beat in response to Kulthum. All the music that Grace turns on, it's sort of like, okay, does it matter? Yes, it matters. It matters a great deal for our children, our future. It matters. When I go to an Islamic camp and they turn on Urdu songs and do Urdu or Arab, I don't care, I actually get very disappointed. Because you are wanting your children to fit into a cultural paradigm that I assure you is not theirs. It is not theirs. To talk to my son about when I was his age, how many people I knew that were arrested and disappeared and buried somewhere in the desert. My son, that's completely alien to him. Baba, what are you talking about? What is that strange world when people like me would stand and say, why is it that we can be tortured and come out of Lazoghli, and those of you who are Egyptian will know what Lazoghli is, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا لَزُغْلِ. It's a terrifying place. Now there are many terrifying places in Egypt because Sisi has multiplied it many times. When you come out of Lazoghli after having been tortured to unimaginable ways, and you look at the society around you and you ask yourself, how are you Muslim? Why is it that you don't care about what happened to people like me? Why is it that it doesn't matter to you? But that paradigm, which scars your psyche forever, is not the psyche that is needed for Islam to take off in the West. It's not the psyche of a convert. It's not the psyche of my children. Let me stop there. So may Allah bless you for what you said, and may Allah bless you. I'm actually really excited that I have a right and left two converts. That's a treat. It makes me very happy. I wish it was the norm. I really do.
Thank you so much, and let me just briefly add that I think we need connections with scholars like Khaled Abou El Fadl. I've studied with scholars from West Africa, from Iran, from Indonesia, and yet I also recognize exactly what they're saying. We need an indigenous American Islam to take root here, from Black Muslims, white, Latino, immigrants, people from all over, their children. And if it's not done, it's just not going to resonate with people. And you mentioned this rootedness that Islam takes in all of the different cultures. We see it in the art, the aesthetics, the music, and so I think what we're doing here at Hub, what you're doing at the Usuli Institute, these are efforts that hopefully, God willing, inshallah, will take off and there'll be more like them. Do we have, yes, sir?
Dr. Khaled, assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for sending us the invitation to be here. Feels like a homecoming. It's been about 10 years, I think, since you graciously offered us your hospitality at your house. And the youth, or not youth anymore, still remember that visit. And many of those kids, by the way, that attended that meeting are now leaders in our community. A couple of them are imams now. So, Jazakallah khair, we still remember your words, and we still have our notes. And I still remember you using the word intellectual restlessness a lot. So I continue to use that in a very pervasive fashion. But I have two questions, and I haven't thought about this a lot, but it was triggered by the conversations that were had earlier. So I'm wondering if there was any research, historical research, that was done about early Muslims as the Sahaba and the subsequent generations as they moved into the new lands and the new countries that were acquired, and then the very fast process of territorial acquisition that took place in the earlier years of Islam. And what were the social, economic, and political roles of the immigrants versus the indigenous populations as they were converting to Islam? And I wonder sometimes, because I feel like, indigenous Muslims, second generation Muslims or third generation, or converts, they look at, immigrants, particularly those with knowledge and those who have an aggressive attitude about that knowledge, they look at them as authorities. And so sometimes, it's a role, that sort of internalizes, and then, as an immigrant, I look at myself as an authority because they made me feel so. So I'm wondering sometimes how early Muslims handled that particular issue, because they did send the roots of Islam in those areas, and it was also based on the efforts of the indigenous people that converted to Islam, as you said earlier. The other thing that I wanted to ask is, as a leader in my own community, I also struggle with questions about converts a lot. And I feel like the masajid are handling this in two extreme ways. I mean, there is the method that Sister Grace described earlier, the dismissive attitude of converts. Come here, you follow our rules, and that's it. If you can't fit in, God bless you. If you can't, you're more than welcome to get out of here, kind of attitude. And so I see that many converts want boundaries, they want rules, they want new definitions of this new life that they embark upon. They want somebody to give them conservative opinions, because this is what crystallizes and solidifies the new identity, right? They actually think that, when people give them mellow opinions, oh no, this is not Islamic enough for me. I want to embrace the new thing to its fullest, right? And so I do see that, and the other alternative, like I said, is that, so the conservative institutions are feeding, certain converts with that clear identity of halal, haram, and boundaries, and it's really like, you need to change your name, you need to dress like this, and you need to act like that. And many embrace it, and some are turned away. And the other institutions that are liberal in their attitude, it's almost like they dilute the boundaries for the new Muslims, so the new Muslims are left, okay, what am I doing? How is this different from my previous life? So the question is, how do we create an environment that still maintains the soundness of our authentic tradition, but still make it welcome to, the converts? And it's not just the converts, by the way. It is, the first and second and third generation Muslims that, and many of them are coming to the deen as if they're converting to Islam, even though they grew up in Muslim families. So, thank you.
Wow. These are two heavy questions. And yeah, speaking of intellectual restlessness, I mean, you poked the hornet's nest. Okay, the first question, which is of a very different nature. You really actually, because let me re-articulate the question, so we're all clear about what we're talking about. The issue is our historical knowledge of not the Islamic conquests, because history of empires is one thing, and where empires sent their armies, what battles took place, and so on. But social-religious history is quite different from imperial history. And what you're asking is about our knowledge of social-religious history, and more specifically, these social dynamics that led to the spread of the Islamic faith in the very early generations, not by imperial command and not through mass tribal movements where a head of a tribe converts and then more or less everyone else are to some extent, Muslim or another. But this sort of micro-level history. Now, the reason I sort of paused, because it's an intensely important question, and it has to do with the way that Muslim history has been written in the modern age. Let me just remind everyone that Islamic history in the modern age, in modernity, was not written by Muslim historians. The art of history, the historical method in the modern age, was written primarily by Orientalists. And as Orientalists, they were interested in what they perceived as the Islamic heartland, which is primarily the Arab world. And they saw the peripheries, or what they considered to be peripheries, as incidental. So if you look at German Orientalism and French Orientalism, and where most of the resources were expended for a narrative on Islamic history, interest in Islam in Senegal, or Islam in the Philippines, or Islam in even Malaysia or Indonesia, which are enormous Muslim populations, they were always seen as a peripheral history to the heartland of Islam. I hope I'm not losing people. Everyone following? Good. I don't want to get too academic, but I want to, at the same time, honestly answer the question. Now, the other thing that they were very interested in was, in fact, imperial history in Islam. There was nearly zero interest in the micro-history, in social history of Islam. There was even an assumption among Orientalist scholars that Islam spread by the sword, with very few dissenters, and this till even very recently, when you try to do the type of micro-social history that you're talking about, many institutions, until very recently, would not approve that as a doctoral type dissertation. It would be, and till today, and I'm a product of Princeton, I can tell you that till today, till our very day, if you wanted to do the type of social history that you're talking about, the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Princeton would not approve it. They want a type of history that constantly speaks about Islam as an imperial phenomenon, not as a social phenomenon. Now, the truth of the matter is that most of our Muslim historians who were trained in historical methodology were trained per Orientalist scholars. So who's the fancy guy that comes from the University of Cairo or from Islamabad is the person who trained in the West. That's the prestige. If you never trained in the West, and anyone that lived in the Muslim world knows that your coolness barometer goes up if you trained in the West, it goes down if you didn't train in the West. And not only that, but if you pretty much plagiarized Western historians. So, you know, how do you translate the fanciest historian from the Muslim world, they're pretty much paraphrasing one Western historian or another. Now, all of this I say as an introduction to a very critical point, and something that feeds my intellectual restlessness, as Grace and Sharif and Nido and people that live with me will tell you I'm endlessly restless about it, is that I don't believe the type of history that you're talking about has been written yet in the modern age. We are still, as Muslims, most of our tradition is in makhtutat form. It's in manuscripts. till today, the vast majority of our tradition has not been edited and has not, and even with efforts where people have started making certain manuscripts available on the net, the number of people that combine the ability to work with manuscripts, to actually read manuscripts, and at the same time are trained in historical and especially social historical methodology are extremely limited. And then the number of people that can find the type of supervisor that would encourage them to break ranks with the Patricia Crones, and leave alone the Goldziers and the Schachts, but also the Patricia Crones and the Michael Cooks and these big name Orientalists that even in the Muslim world are held in such reverence and such. I think the first step is to become intellectually restless about our tradition, to get that itch that says the story hasn't been told. I don't buy that Islam spread imperially. We all know that empires have and the fact is the Islamic history, the history of early Islamic generations is far more complex than has been said in any history book that we've read. And then to get that itch of saying, I want to investigate the manuscripts that come from Senegal and come from Timbuktu. I was contacted recently by a fellow from Timbuktu who had saved, how many manuscripts were there? 4,000 manuscripts from ISIS, because ISIS was going around destroying Islamic manuscripts. This group saved 4,000 Islamic manuscripts. And he's trying to find a home, and when he started telling me the titles of some of the manuscripts, I nearly fainted. Because some of these manuscripts are registered in Brockelman and Sisgin, which is considered sort of the Bible on which manuscripts survived as lost. And he's telling me, yeah, I have a copy of it right now. And what the heck is going on? Do you know how our entire historiography changed with these types of manuscripts? Of course, so I don't go off on a tangent. So you're asking exactly the right questions, because the companions who traveled to Hind and Sindh, and the companions who traveled to, and the Islam that spread through the ethics of trade and merchandise, that's the Islam that is most relevant for the converts in the West. And what type of dynamics took place, and what was the history of the Sufi movement? We know that Islam spread not primarily through Wahhabism and historical, but through Sufism. But dare say that I was in Egypt years ago at AUC, American University of Cairo, and I said that Islam spread around the world primarily through Sufism. I was nearly kicked out. How, astaghfirullah, how can you dare say that? But that's history. How can you deny history? You might not like Sufism today because you think whatever you think. But the truth of the matter is, it was through the dhikr, the halaqat al-dhikr, and the songs and the performances and the rituals of Sufism, which captured the imagination of people around the world and that brought converts to Islam. That history has not been written. That history remains politicized, thoroughly politicized, and those who try to break ranks often get, and I often warn young scholars, don't get sucked into the dogma, because there are a lot of people who see a political cause in Sufism that want to suck you in dogmatically, and a lot of people who are against Sufism who want to suck you in dogmatically. And for a scholar to steer that tortuous road of independence and intellectual integrity, I I know I'm at risk of going into on a rant, but I blame, between me and Allah, the people, the rich people in the Muslim communities. Because unless Muslims support independent scholarship of integrity, unless rich Muslims support and fund education, we will never own our own narratives. Till today, look at the Center for Jewish Studies at UCLA. Look at the list of donors for Jewish studies. We have, other than the Hillel and other than Shabbat, and we have the Center for Israeli Studies, we have the Center for Jewish Studies, we have the Center for Hebrew Studies. Islamic Studies is dirt poor. Our only money comes from Title VII, from the federal government. We went and begged the Muslims for Islamic studies, please, please. You'll never have, we right now have a chair who's Muslim and an esteemed tenured professor who's Muslim. How often do we have that support us? They give us $10,000. What do you do in academia with $10,000? I have Muslim students who are finishing their doctorates and saying, we don't know where to work. There are no postdoctorate fellowships. If you're doing Jewish studies, oh my God, the number. Even Indian studies. If you're in Indian studies now, it's monopolized by Hindu Muslims. Hindu Indians who hate anyone that comes from an Islam Muslim perspective, who talks about Mughal India in any positive terms. Same thing with Japanese studies. Same thing with Chinese studies. Till when is Islamic studies going to remain colonized? It's not scholars who can break through. It's those who support scholars and don't say, we only support you unless you say what we like you to say. Because that's a non-starter. Scholarship is never about that. If a scholar says what you like 50% of the time, 50% of the time, then alhamdulillah, you should be very good. That's the nature of intellectual restlessness, is that you must explore, you must investigate, you must get crazy ideas and bad ideas, and then say, astaghfirullah, Allah forgive me, I'm going to try again. That's the nature of scholarship. But rich people don't understand that. Rich people want the Sirat al-Mustaqim from the beginning, tell us that you're going to show us the Sirat al-Mustaqim or else we're not going to invest. That's if they invest. Because my experience so far, I know I'm going to get into trouble on this, but risk Allah. We have reached the point in Islamic studies at UCLA to target Jewish donors for Islamic studies. We've decided that our chances of getting money is from Jewish donors. I can't stand it anymore. I'm a 10-year professor. I have no more promotions that I can go through. I've gone through all of them in my university. So alhamdulillah, khalas, it's a done deal for me. The next step will come, inshallah. But you feel suffocated. What is wrong with Muslims? Why? Didn't we build a civilization based on awqaf? The entire Muslim civilization was built on awqaf. The awqaf were not funded by the government. Wazarat al-Awqaf was a colonial invention. There was never a Wazarat al-Awqaf. There was never a ministry of awqaf. It was all money from society that is committed to its faith, that built the entire edifice of the Islamic civilization. What was the second question?
Mosques, people,
you're absolutely right. I mean, I was actually really happy that Grace didn't repeat the story that she always repeats, because she always repeats a story about when we first met, and I never thought that I would repeat it because it portrays me as a jerk. When she first called me at Princeton, I don't know, maybe I was in a bad mood. I said to her, she said I'm a convert, and she was really excited, and she was so bubbly and optimistic, and then I said, you know, if you think I'm going to be impressed that you converted to Islam or not, because there are two people that convert to Islam today, insane people and brilliant people. And of course she said, well, I hope I'm from the second group. It's a jerky thing to say, you know, and she's never made me allowed me to forget. The reason I mentioned this not very flattering story is that we have to, honesty in discourse requires us to admit that not all those that come to Islam in the West are of the same ilk. There are many that come to Islam because already of a pre-existing social crisis, sexual abuse, drug abuse, deep dysfunctions in the family, ugly divorces that they witnessed, and they come to Islam with the idea that they are sort of the concept of an i'tizal min al-mujtama, the concept of disassociating and divorcing the culture that they have become alienated towards. And so they use Islam very much like I use a cane to walk. It allows them to cope with, but they don't come to Islam to exercise their intellect, and they don't come to Islam to investigate the way that intellectual restlessness requires them to investigate. They come to Islam for easy answers, and that's what they want. And the minute they find a sheikh that gives them the easy answers, and the more the sheikh engages in the affectation and pretenses of piety, the more you, before you say anything, you introduce with, you know, all the taslimat and tasbihat and tahmidat and mashallah, and that's what they love. And the more you put on all the trappings of disassociation from society, they look at people like me who say Islam is an intellectual investigation and an exploration and so on. You know, the minute their sheikh tells them, well, that's Mu'tazila people, these people like Mu'tazilis and so on. Oh, okay, we are now Barakallah fiction, and they're very happy with that. They don't want Islam. These are the people that I was referring to as the insane when I was talking to Grace. I mean, the brilliants are the ones that have the potential of taking Islam to the different. These are the Muslims that they truly, for them, they came to Islam through a deep spiritual and intellectual investigation. They are already accomplished people. They've already gone to Berkeley and gone to Cornell, and they have already can cope with the demands and the challenges of society and prove themselves accomplished and brilliant. But they come to Islam because intellectually and spiritually, other systems have failed to convince them. They studied Christianity and said, we don't buy the whole Trinity thing. And they've read the history of Christianity and said, we have deep problems with that. They studied the whole history of Judaism and reflected on it and said, Jewish converts are not, that's not the track of truth. They studied the possibilities of, and sort of westernized Buddhism or westernized or Americanized Hinduism and saw through all the deceptions and all the Oprah Winfrey type feel good, what's the name of that guy?
Deepak Chopra.
Yeah, Deepak Chopra. They've seen through all of that. And they said, no, we want something more. These are the people who are gold for us. These are the people who can truly present an Islam that will convince and compel. And and this is a really important point, and can respond to the Islamophobes. Because we haven't talked about the Islamophobes. The Islamophobes are poison for our children. and for our entire future. It is such a sinister and well-funded movement that we haven't even started to confront yet. Okay.
I'd like to ask one question, if I may. In the 50s, you studied at Al-Azhar. Sheikh Mahmoud Shaltut issued a fatwa accepting Shi'i rulings that Sunnis could follow those legal rulings. And then more recently, we've had the Amman statement, wherein scholars around the world said that Sunnis, Shia, Sufis were all Muslim, and they committed themselves to accepting one another as essentially one ummah. Yet in the West, we're divided into essentially ghettoized mosques, and our academic institutions even reflect this if they've been funded by the Saudis. How is it that we, our schools, our mosques, our community centers can welcome Muslims of different denominations while still perhaps remaining true to our own understanding of Islam?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really good question. First, Sheikh Shaltut was a very important scholar in Islamic history, and he was part of what was known as Dawat al-Taqrib, or a concerted effort to bridge a gap between Sunnis and Shia. And Dawat al-Taqrib crystallized in these conferences that they used to hold annually, where Shia and Sunni scholars would meet together and find civil ways to talk about what they disagree about. Sadly, before the illness in the West, you have to remember that Dawat al-Taqrib was killed. And you have to remember that before, yes, we have on the one hand events where we emphasize that Shia and the Sunnah are one, but we also have an unbelievable number of fatwa that declare the Shia kuffar or declare the Sunnah kuffar, depending on what perspective you come from. And you have to remember that in fact, unfortunately, now the Saudi-controlled Azhar, a lot of even Egyptian Shia have declared the Shia out of the pale, and leave alone the Saudi Shia who tell you that fighting the Shia is far more important than any Palestinian cause. And in fact, that is the main justification for the abandonment of the Palestinians. That all the Sunnis are supposed to stand up to the Shia threat to the Sunni world and forget the Palestinians, forget Gaza, forget Jerusalem. Salman and his goons, and in fact, shuyukh that I respect in Saudi are now in prison because they would not go along with the thesis of forget Jerusalem and forget the Palestinians. Now, the truth of the matter is that these psychopathies do infect Muslims in the West. And they, especially Muslim, I'm sure you know that Saudi has a very active program where you can go to Medina, you can, a well-funded program where you can study at the government's expense, and it's open to Muslims coming from the West. And people that go to Medina and come back, I find that they have been charged with this anti-Shia thing. Quite often, they haven't read any of the original sources, but they have memorized the tropes The Shia curse the companions. How can you tell me we can accept people that curse the companions? Do you know that they said Omar is such, and so on and so forth? That is, and by the way, I mean, from, again, experiences life, I discovered that the Islamophobes love that. I mean, and if I'm trying to remember the Egyptian saying, but I can't remember it. Well, basically, if you want to know what to do, how to do the right thing, see what your enemy likes, and do the opposite, and then you're doing the right thing. If we just take that, if we see whatever the Islamophobes like, that would help us a great deal, by the way, in knowing what's the right thing to do. Maybe I'm idealistic, but I think we have to be honest about where the schism comes from, and we have to be honest about how we can breach that schism. I'll be even more blunt, and I'll say something that will shock some of you. I have reached the conclusion that even if there are Muslims who think some of the companions have committed a kabir, a grave sin, that we still have to accept them as Muslims. My own historical investigations, not because I agree with them, I don't think, I accept the narrative that Abu Bakr, that ultimately, the narrative that leads towards the Sunni side of it. But I've reached the conclusion that it is not good enough for me to say that you are not part of the faith because you will not accept traditions that have been reported by Umar radiallahu anhu or Abu Bakr because you think they betrayed Ali, and so on and so forth. I have, and we cannot remain frozen at the rhetorics of the fitna. And I've written, my first big book, which was published by Cambridge, discussed the issue of the fitna and the whole ahkam al-bugha issue and so on at not just a tedious length. I mean, it's an extremely boring book to read, and it's very dense, and but it's at the same time a necessary discourse. And we have to be honest about the way we talk about things. Can you find in some Shia sources things that are inappropriate to say about any human being, leave alone the companions? Yes, absolutely. But at the same time, we have to understand and be honest about the fact that the Umayyin would curse Ali on the Manabir. And their commands to Khutbah al-Jum'ah, those who gave the service of Jum'ah, was to curse Ali on the Manabir. And that for early Muslims could not believe. How could Ali be the Prophet's cousin and you curse him before you give a khutbah or at the end of the khutbah? And we thought, now we have to heal these schisms with honesty and understanding and saying, this is what happened to history, and we can understand where each historical perspective came from. But people, these are not our issues today.
Yes. Thank you.
Other questions? You know, I pop up somewhere every once in a while, a long while, because my travels are very, very limited. We always joke that it's like, every time we travel, it's like a hijrah for us. Because the type of stuff we have to do home, to leave home, Allah bless her, Grace carries with her like a little pharmacy wherever I go. You know, she's my doctor and my pharmacist. And then we also have our other parts of the other members of our family, our pets, which we have to hire an army of people to take care of. So my point is, my travels are very limited, so this is your chance. It's not likely that I'm going to So ask anything.
There's a question over here.
Is there was a microphone.
Yeah, I have one here. And not to be sexist, but I want some women to ask questions too.
And also, you know, feel free to ask Grace or Zachary a question. I always say, if any of you have heard the Usuli halakas, I always say, what Grace says doesn't necessarily represent me, and vice versa. We are completely two independent, autonomous human beings. And if you would join us at our home, we disagree about a lot of things, and we debate them vigorously, and at the end we love each other very passionately. Alhamdulillah.
So just about your point about how to create the version of Islam that is in America that is not an immigration or immigrant phenomena to like a native phenomena in this land, and you gave examples about Indonesia and India. I would consider even Egypt, where Islam was something new and over time it became native. But the thing that maybe I want to hear your comment about the difference in the historical context, because at the time the Muslims were basically the victorious side. It was the superpower of the old world at the time, and right now we are even Muslims themselves. Like we feel that we are the defeated nation. We idealize the Western values, the Western lifestyle. Our definition for being first world is basically to adopt the cities in America, the way people live, having the cars, like all the maybe the capitalist values, even in the Muslim lands, for those people even who never traveled abroad. So how do you think this could affect the creation of a native phenomenon of Islam in the West, given that we Muslims themselves look at themselves as a defeated and maybe the lower tier? Yeah.
I'm very happy you asked this question. Yesterday I said if you look at the eye of most Muslims, you find the broken people. And events, especially events since the Arab Spring, you know, if you're, for instance, if you're Egyptian and somehow the massacre of people in Rabaa hasn't bothered you, and the thousands of people that are being tortured in prisons doesn't bother you, and so on. Yes, you're absolutely right. As a Muslim, it becomes such an emotional damage for me to look at this other Muslim and say, what type of human being are you? The same thing happened with Quds. I mean, I was talking to someone from the State Department right after Trump was elected, and he was telling me, oh, you know, I suspect that the minute Trump moves the embassy, the amount of demonstrations that are going to take place around the Muslim world is going to create a crisis in the State Department, and Trump moved the embassy, and that was another break. I mean, our sense of pride is not just broken, it is, yeah. If you're like myself and you work in the human rights field, and you know, Grace has to come in and confiscate the pictures of tortured people and force me to stop reading the human rights material and watching the human rights videos, because I suffered a heart attack once because of this. And Joe says, you know, I don't want you to have the second heart attack. I suffered the first heart attack after the coup in Egypt. And now, but here's the thing. I humbly admit that living with someone like Grace, I discovered that a lot of the psychological ruptures that infect my soul is not just not in her, but is not shared by that second type of converts that I talk about, the brilliant converts. That they approach Islam with a level of optimism. And I would say it, a faith in Allah. We always joke that Grace is half full and I am not half empty, I'm completely empty. Whenever anything said happens, I expect the worst. I see the worst. I'm addicted to the worst. I am amazed. I have to honestly admit, I'm amazed often at not just Grace, but a lot of converts like Grace who will just smile and say, Allah will take care of you. My iman, now of course, I understand intellectually, is because, alhamdulillah, Grace has not seen what my eyes have seen. And I don't want that optimism, because what I've seen, a human being should not see. What all of us from the countries we came from, we grew up with, the human being should not see their brothers and sisters killed in the street. A human being should not see another human being tortured to death. That's not normal. And the fact that we've been forced into this position is a true mihna, it's a true trial from Allah. Our hope is with these undamaged psyches that come to Islam because of study and reflection. Now, you asked how. My dream, and this is the dream of the Usuli Institute, and right now it seems so, again, for me, because I'm completely empty, I see it as, way out in the, and Grace, says, no, it's completely achievable. It's a step away. No,
That's not true, but.
Yeah, but that's how optimism strikes me. Because, yeah. Okay, so anyway, people like me, and I emphasize this point, should be in the background, training and pushing forward conference. That's the dream that I have. The actual podiums. So I give a khutbah at the Islamic Center for Southern California. I have one this coming Juma. And I'm not happy when converts are put on the podium and their Islamic training is so superficial that they come out as silly. But I'm also not happy when very few converts come out and the people who actually give the khutbah most often have broken English and a very limited terminology, and even their paradigms, their epistemological conceptions are literally translated from the cultures that have been severely damaged by colonialism and imperialism. The true humility is to recognize that we do come from cultures that are severely damaged by colonialism, imperialism, and racism. We look at a white human being. That racism has infected the colonized as much as it has infected the colonizer. If you don't believe me, live in the Gulf countries, and any of you that lived in the Gulf countries know exactly what I'm talking about. You know what the position of a white man or a white woman is, and what the position of an Indian, or a Sri Lankan, or a Bangladeshi, or an Arab, or a Palestinian. You know how hierarchical the racial ladder is. That's a disease. And it's a disease that is not innate to the Islamic civilization. It's a disease, as Arnold Toynbee said, we will have thoroughly succeeded as colonizer if we infect them with our diseases. And what is the first disease? Arnold Toynbee, he has a book called Islam in the West, which was written at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. It says racism. And subhanAllah, they were completely successful in infecting it. When we have a king that killed his son because his son was black, you know, all of you know, that's King of Saudi Arabia, one of the most gruesome stories. When I remember the stories of the Sahaba, and I see converts that come from a thoughtful, reflective paradigm, and I see their outrage at things like racism and classism and injustice, I am very much reminded of the early Sahaba, and I wish that I could transplant myself to wipe my disc clean, forget all the things I've gone through in life, and become just like them. But I can't. I mean, I still do my salah. I mean, I'll be honest, I still suffer from severe PTSD. I still wake up with nightmares. You know, one of the first things is, you wake up from your sleep with nightmares, and the first thing that Grace has learned to say is, you're not there anymore. You're in America. You're in America. Astaghfirullah. It shouldn't be. It's not how human beings should be. But the assets that I have is skill that is extremely valuable. And that's the skill of being able to unlock the mysteries of manuscripts, to read the various khutut, to know the various scripts, to be able to give lectures about what makhtuta was written in which script and how to read it, to be able to read the hawashi of the makhtutat and know the importance of the hawashi and what the symbol means and what that symbol means. And if I can teach it, this is my fantasy. If you can marry this knowledge to the faith of the reflective convert, nothing can stop us. We would match the threat of Islamophobia and more. I am convinced, because I knew Daniel Pipes when he was a student of Bernard Lewis, and I know it's a long story, but I was present in some of the conversations between Bernard Lewis and Daniel Pipes. I am convinced that Daniel Pipes and Bernard Lewis understood that threat extremely well in the 90s. And that's why they launched the entire Islamophobia campaign, and that's why they went to rich families, Christian and Jewish families, and said, give us money, because if we don't act to neutralize that threat now, you might reach a point where the Christian right has to confront Islam as a major force in the US and Europe, and Islam would be seen as a reasonable discourse, and we would have things like the African American movement with its mass converts. Bernard Lewis, in front of me, told Daniel Pipes, I wrote my book about Islam and slavery because I was extremely concerned about the number of black Muslims who were converting to Islam. So I had to tell them slavery came from Muslims. That's the reality of academia. We have to wake up and smell truth. You know, we can sit in our mosques and give all the alhamdulillahs and subhanallahs and Allah. That's not going to go anywhere. And I have to humbly admit that my baggage is intimately intertwined with the legacy of colonialism, imperialism, and all the zift that came from them. All the true zift that came from them. But that zift doesn't affect these people. You want to say something?
You know, this is something we talk about and struggle with a lot, and this is really why we have the Usuli Institute, because I think that, you know, the combination of the perspective that I bring and that the professor brings is, you know, really unique. I mean, honestly, two more unlikely people should not have ever come together. You know, we laugh about it and we joke about it, but it's truly from Allah, and I think that the work that we do, it is... Oh.
That's good. I have to, there's no worry, no emergencies, afterwards. That's from the shaitan, see?
Yeah.
Shaitan said, no, this is too good, I'm gonna torpedo it.
Thank you. But it's a, you know, it's a really important combination because you need people who have the feeling of entitlement, right? I grew up in America, I'm American. And yes, I'm Chinese and all of that, but it's like, this is my country. And, you know, part of the reason why I chose Islam is because in reading books, you know, in thinking about, you know, the emphasis on justice and kindness and beauty and love and, you know, uplifting the oppressed. I mean, these are things that Americans fundamentally believe in, and that is their right, and that's what defines us. So this is like what we aspire to as Americans, and yet this is our tradition. This is what Islam stands for. And I always say that if people understood like what Islam actually was and knew what it, you know, it calls for and demands, that people would come to Islam, especially Americans, would come to Islam in droves. And the thing is, it's like, this is the one thing that's hidden in the most, you know, like, unlikely place most Americans will look, right? Because they look at Muslims and they go, oh my God, you know, I could never be Muslim. And this is actually the obstacle that, you know, I mean, this is the thing about converts and my point about how, you know, every single convert has, this is my hypothesis, has a divine intervention. Because there's something with each individual person that has to be unlocked for them to be open to Islam. For me, my obstacle was, oh, come on, I could never see myself as Muslim. You know, I mean, I come from a Taiwanese background. I grew up in America. I grew up in Palo Alto. You know, I have this particular life. I would be going backwards. You know, people are going to think that I'm completely nuts and crazy and something is mentally wrong with me to become a Muslim. And so my story is that, you know, when I was at Cornell and I checked out my book, I got into a habit every night. You know, I would go and do my stuff in business school and I would come home at night and then I would open up, you know, a little bit, read a little bit, think about what I was reading. And I was always really surprised, actually, because when I started reading about Islam, and I just had the negative impression that everyone else had. And as I started to read about it, I was like, oh my God, this is what I always believed. Just from, you know, like, this is what I thought life should be. And so it was shocking to me. But at the same time, then the voice would come in, yeah, but you're crazy. You could never be Muslim. Come on. You know, what are you going to tell your mom? What are you going to tell your dad? You know, what are you going to tell your friends and family? And so one night I remember that I was out at the bars with my classmates, you know, doing what business school kids do. And I came home and I, you know, was really depressed and really sad. I felt very lost. And you know that feeling when you're like so depressed that you feel a hole in your stomach, like it's just empty and there's nothing that can fill it. And so I was sitting on my bed and I was hugging my pillow and I was crying and I was like, you know, and I hadn't talked to God. I mean, now by this time I had been doing it for a few, you know, months or whatever, but before I was interested in seeking, I had stopped talking to God. I've always believed in God, but there was no communication channel open. So when I started doing this you know, nightly ritual of reflection and reading and prayer, I started talking to God. And for a long time, it was kind of like I had nothing. You know, I was like talking to the wall. There was just nothing there. And then that night, I was crying, and I was hugging my pillow, and I was so like, God, I feel so lost. You know, I don't know what to do. And in an instant, that hole in my stomach was filled. Like, and I like sat up, and you know, it was weird because you know when you're depressed like that, nothing makes it go away. Absolutely nothing. You know, you can eat all the ice cream you want. You can, you know, whatever, do everything nice. It just did not go away. That moment, that feeling was completely gone. And I felt in my heart, I didn't hear voices, but I felt in my heart, keep going, you're on the right track. And I knew what that meant. And that meant you're not crazy, and yes, you could potentially be Islam. But it wasn't also, and I've said this story before, it wasn't like God was saying, come to me, my child, yes, you're back. No, it was very much like, okay, I'm listening. You have my attention now, let's see what you do. Keep going, keep reading, keep thinking, keep talking, and it was like prove yourself to me. If, and but you're on the right track. And that was what changed for me, because at that point then I was like, oh my God, okay, so maybe I'm not crazy. And it changed the way that I wanted to read and learn, and even after that I was like, okay, I really want to feel what it feels like to put my face on the floor. You see people praying and it's like, God, it's so weird, I want to see what that feels like. And so I did, and it was weird. But, it's like, it's the baby steps, But, it's like everyone has their own story. And this is what I find, like, when you think about it. Okay, God took the time to give each one of these people their own personalized divine intervention that unlocked whatever it was that needed to be unlocked. And it's different. So,
it is so true.
So think about that in the aggregate.
And as migrants, as native, we have to value that. We have to value that divine intervention, because that method, that ilham, that is something that Allah will hold us accountable to in the final day if we've wasted it. If we did not value it, it's going to say, I divinely intervened. What did you do with my interventions?
So if you think about that in the aggregate, and you think like all the different converts, just in America, right? Because we've met so many now, and they're all isolated, they all feel alone, they all feel like they can't go to the mosque because they don't feel like they fit in, right? But they have no cultural baggage. They have no expectation. It's like they're learning from effectively a blank page. But they come to the religion because they're in love with the ideas. They're in love with the theology. And they've spent the time to learn and read and investigate, much more so than people who are born into the religion and take it for granted. That, and they can't really separate where culture ends and theology begins. So, I think that it begins with a bit of empathy for the convert. Because it's like, now I've made these comments and people have said, oh yeah, I've met converts and usually I don't really quite know what to say and I get busy, so I kind of, I say, oh, alhamdulillah, and then I leave them alone. And they're like, oh, but then now that you've said this, I feel guilty because I really haven't done very much for them. And I think that that's a common thing, but it begins with understanding, what it takes to become a convert. And it's, it's unusual. I mean, because, people really don't fully know what it means unless they've gone through it. But to the extent that you can, try to envision, what would I give up to remain Muslim? And it's just funny. A funny story. Like the other day, we were somewhere and he was filming an Arabic public service announcement, and we met this Egyptian woman, and she said to me, she was like, oh, you know the word ummah, right? You know what ummah means? Or she was trying to explain that, and I realized, oh, she probably doesn't know that I'm Muslim. So I said, oh, I know I'm Muslim. Yeah, no, I know ummah. And she was, oh, okay. But you know what ummah means, right? Ummah, and it's like she couldn't get into her brain that, of course I know what ummah means. I sacrificed everything to be Muslim, and I'm proud to be Muslim. How would I not know what ummah? But I can't be, rude. Okay, fine, I understand that. But that's what kind of made me realize. I think that a lot of people, don't understand context, because it's like, why would you give up what you have to be like us? That's shame. And for us, it's like, holy cow, this is the secret of life. You were given this. We had to find it. We had to go through all of this to get to it. And, so there's a disconnect. But I think that there's a marriage here that needs to happen. Because the converts bring that, the brilliant converts, hopefully, I don't want to say I'm brilliant, but alhamdulillah, thank you. But, it's like, okay, we are committed. You know, we wouldn't change anything. And so we have the passion, but we don't necessarily have the knowledge and the experience from the depth of the tradition. So it's like the marriage of having someone who, you know, a scholar who really delves into the books and the tradition can guide us and help us with that, you know, that well of wisdom. And married with the, you know, the energy, the optimism, the aspiration, and the entitlement. You know, I have rights in this country. And also, you know, I was trained here in America, so as an American, I expect to be the best of everything. You know, we should be at the forefront of best practices for everything Islamic. Like, I don't understand, why do we not have like a standard of best practices for mosques? You know, like, why is it that mosques, you know, the minute you walk in, it's like, Assalamu alaikum, welcome. Have you never been to a mosque before? Wonderful. Let me take you on a tour. Let me show you what we do. We're welcoming you. You know, this is basic stuff. Every single industry, every single field has best practices. But I think that, you know, because converts are often polite and, you know, because that's what we're taught. You're supposed to be polite. You know, this is why we like this religion, because you care about other people. You know, we let those who have been Muslim longer lead, because we also naturally assume they know more. But that's actually not true. And that was actually one of the biggest misconceptions that I had. You know, when I entered the faith, I just assumed, oh my God, all these people know everything. And that was naive. You know, no, most people haven't necessarily even read the Quran. So that's so, you know, part of my message is, hey converts, you know, hey everyone, think about what it takes to be a convert. And if you bring all of that force together, that is a force to be reckoned with. That we can unleash crazy amounts of goodness. And we can make all kinds of difference for humanity. But, you know, sometimes people need that permission. They need to be told that they can do that, and that it's okay, and not even just that it's okay, but that they should do that. And I hope that that's what we do, is to say, you know what, don't wait for anyone's permission. Run with it, do it, nothing's stopping you. You know, and then in fact, that's what God wants. That's what God expects of us. And we have the privilege of being in a country where we're not, you know, getting starved or shot or killed or, you know, living under the threat of drone strikes. So we're going to be held to a higher, like, accountability. So we got to move, we got to be active, and we can't be, you know. And this is the other thing, is I want people to have confidence. Because I think a lot of Muslims feel, they don't know their faith enough to feel truly confident that this is the right faith, and that it calls for beauty, and it calls for humanity, and it calls for, you know, active engagement, and that God is with us, you know, every moment. You just remember God, and God will sit with you. And it's like so beautiful. So, you know, there's just so much that we can unleash together. That's, you know. Female question. We'll go Humera and then Mrs.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum. I, in response to Greg's, you know, it's the mosque environment or the mosque culture here, and I'm born Muslim, and it is difficult for me to fit in. I have a daughter who is, you know, almost 30 years old, and I started taking her to mosque, and all these restrictions and, you know, how to get to the hell was the prime, you know, thing for her. It's like, no, I don't want to go there. It's all they're talking about, you know, I'll end up in hell. And so what is it that I'm doing wrong? And so, you know, I was living in a community where there are not very many cultural, you know, it's from my background, you know, I didn't have very many people from my country or, you know, the neighboring countries. So she was going to school, there were no, you know, probably 3 or 4 people from all South Asia. And she was growing up with, you know, white Americans and Chinese and, you know, the other, but not very many, you know, people from our country. So, and there's not a mosque around where I was living, so of course, you know, I started, you know, her first introduction to Quran was English. And then when I came back to Bay Area, I went to, you know, people, so I was trying to get involved with, you know, the culture, with the mosque, and the notion that I was getting is that, okay, you know, she's reading English Quran, so it's not gonna suffice. so what do I do? And I was like, oh my God. And I didn't have, I'm coming from Bangladesh, so you can imagine, I'm coming from a very rigid Islamic information, with very rigid information in my head. It's like, oh no, everything is taking us to hell. And when it's not only you, so I can go there, they start bidding, if your fringe is out of your hijab, so it was hard for me to taking a 10 years old or a 13 years old daughter to mosque where she was not, feeling comfortable going there. And when I started actually listening to Dr. Fadl, I think it just, given me a very different, it's opened my mind very differently. And what I was, I think I'm finding what I was searching for. And I was listening to Jeffrey Lang, I don't know if you know him, he's a mathematician and who was an atheist and he converted. So I was listening to him and he brought up these issues with mosque. So what do we, how do we invite our kids to Islam who are, first generation or second generation coming from outside this world?
Yeah, this is, one is I always say we need to demand more of our mosques because there's such inertia, and I think that we have to demand better. And I know that these things will take some time. With our son who's 13, when I was thinking about, how do I want to talk to him about Islam, I began by just talking about God like God is just a very normal part of life. It's not, God's a big deal and not a big deal at the same time, if you know what I mean. It's just like what you do. And that, and I speak about love and mercy and good manners and principles and things that are just, that we commonly share with every member of humanity. Because I don't want Islam, on one hand, I don't want it to become like this foreign, like oppressive, kind of like, oh, you need to meet some sort of standard. It needs to be part of who you are as a person, and you being a beautiful, loving person is what it's going to take to be, a good Muslim. And subhanAllah, so now he's in 8th grade and he goes to a Catholic school. And we chose this because the Catholic school also, this particular Catholic school is like very service oriented. It's not, like scary or strict in that sense, but they really try to develop characteristics that I consider very Islamic, because they have very, like good focus on truthfulness and, integrity and all those sorts of things. And, 60% of the kids are not Catholic. But what I love is that he's actually very proud to be Muslim, and I think that part of it is teaching something like Islam that is not foreign, and that is very focused on the fundamental, beautiful message of humanity. Because you're not going to teach your kids about the technicalities of Sharia at this point. You just want to teach them, give them the basic fundamentals, and I think that that's kind of where we just need to start. It's it's not really about labels. It's about being decent and beautiful and loving and kind.
And that's exactly what I had to end up with, to give her what humanity is, what makes you a good human. So that's most important, and then, you will find your way. I had to talk to my mom back home. And my mom is a very learned, knowledgeable person, and she said, well, give her the ground, make her a human first.
I just want to add a little addendum to this. This issue of service, because there's a history to that. The idea of service is anchored, so deeply anchored in Islamic Aqidah. And in fact, we all, learn in a theoretical way that you can't fill your stomach if your neighbor is hungry. Now, of course, we will go and tell women to wear hijab, but we'll never think of actually knocking at our neighbor's door and say, are you financially okay? It's not gonna, because we have things upside down.
Yes.
But I'll tell you something. There's a reason for that. That khidmah Again, most of us, through our colonial experience, if you're service-oriented, that's how you got into political trouble. I learned this in the harshest way possible. I learned when I was still a teenager that the minute you start going around in the slums of Cairo and trying to help people in any way, Al-Dawla calls you in and tells you who's the true boss. And I never forget this as a teen, security forces, Egyptian security forces, may Allah protect you. But they're all the same, by the way. They're all the same. In this country, I'll never forget what as a teenager, one of the things that said, in this country, before the Quran and before your prophet, it's Amn al-Dawla. You have to know who's, and you learn. It's embedded in your psyche. Service is how you get into trouble. The more you internalize Islam in little myopic, tafahat, little marginalia, the safer you are. So when we come to this country, and this is fed to us in our milk, because it's not just started, it started with colonialism. And my teachers, my cousins, my aunts, my friends would always tell me, walk next to the wall. Don't look left or right. It's none of your business who is suffering, who is not suffering. Now we have theology. I just heard a great imam, I'm being facetious, no great imam in my eye, who said, if you stand to give aid to someone suffering injustice, al-mazloom, then this is khuruj al-hakim, this is rebelling against a ruler and you're committing a grave sin, a kabira. This is from the land of Haramain. Another imam from the land of Haramain just got a copy of his fatwa from WhatsApp, said if the imam kills 1/3 of the population, murders, a genocide, 1/3 of the population, you have to obey and say, do you want to kill the other third? Sidi utagrasi. So when this is, we come then here, and it is in the milk we've been fed, that where does the ego of a man, when it's broken, where does it find release? Is on displays of power upon women. Historically, all colonized men, the more the colonizer oppressed them, the more they flex their muscles on their women. And we've come with this social disease into this country. And that's why, as men, when we feel broken egos, the first thing we do, go and cover your hair. It's in our psychology. And so, now, honesty is the first, it's like a doctor. The diagnosis is the first step to health. For us to recognize this, and this is, by the way, I will never become a pop star like some of the other pop stars, wherever they show, they have massive throngs of people show up, because we still don't want honesty in this course.
Yes.
And that's the first step. Because believe me, when we accept that first step, then we start telling things to our children like we do with our son. The first thing we learned about this Catholic school, which requires a certain amount of hours social service, he has to go into the weekends, do social service where he does serve society. So he learned that that's Islam. And he proudly tells his teachers, that's the heart of Islam. Of course he thinks that that's what all Muslims do. because partly we like it, or
Yeah.
I like it, I don't know. Greece doesn't like to lie a lot, but, you know.
So I have a similar experience with my daughter when she was about 8th grade. The 9/11 happened, and so I was told by my friends to take her out of school. This is dangerous and this. And she came to school. She came from school, and of course she was devastated. And it's like, Mom, I'm the other at school. It's really, it's not fair. And I said, well, this is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to teach people who you are. And, what happened is it's not, this was not fair to anybody. And you have to understand and recognize that and have to make other people feel that, who you are and, why you are different from whoever had done that. So, my perspective is that the mosque environment, it's not a complaint. It's a lack of knowledge. How do we feed this knowledge? And in terms of to prosper, the world of mosque where the education should start in Islam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yasmin.
Assalamu alaikum. This is a question that I've asked to many scholars, many shuyukh, looked online, many institutions. I am the person that Grace was talking about who was kicked out of an institution, an Islamic institution, for asking bold questions that offended people. And I think one of the main reasons why people felt intimidated by me is because we have a tendency in our ummah and our scholars, our shuyukh, to give answers that are filled with logical fallacies or half-baked answers that are not complete, and expect people to just be okay with that. And people are okay with those answers, I found. And when someone is restless and they continue to ask the questions and press further, it angers a lot of people. And like you were saying, that people don't want honesty. So I'm going to try one more time and ask this question. And this is a very controversial, like the ayah of the wife beating verse, 434. Why? I've heard every answer. You hit her with a miswak, or like, daraba actually means to make a decision about divorce, and I've heard all of it. But what I don't understand is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran goes into immense detail about many things in the Quran. So why would Allah not go into detail with 3 more words? So you may hit her, but don't leave a mark, or something. So you may hit her, but don't use something that is whatever. Why is it so vague? And this is something that I said in the classroom. I said, when they were trying to give me these answers, and I said, look, people are getting hurt because of this ayah. I was told this is an extremely egregious statement and to shut up.
Well, no, it's actually a really good question. Number one, I have to say that I've written in the, the conference of the books, the Search for Beauty in Islam. I've written rather 2 long chapters about the beating verse. And so I preface it by saying it is important to read, because but to read one for any scholar worth his soul, they're represented by their writings far more than by their lectures. A writing is a deliberative process where you actually select the best that you have. So it raises there are 2 different issues here. The first issue is, what is this verse talking about? And the second issue is, why wouldn't the verse say X, Y, and Z? So why would it greater clarification? Because it raises a larger question, and that is the epistemology of the Quran itself. the way the Quran deals with revelation and how we approach revelation. So one of the issues that I've commented on at length and talked about at length is that normally you are told that there are, I don't know how to talk about it. You've heard of Ummahat al-Mutashabihat, Ayat al-Muhkamat that are Kitab. There are two types. The Quran itself refers to revelation as there are ayat muhkamat, and here we can debate what muhkamat means. Is it clear, ayat of clear meaning, or ayat, Quranic verses that are of clear meaning, or Quranic verses that are foundational and the backbone of the revelation? And mutashabihat, which is the second expression, does it mean verses of ambiguous meaning, verses that can be interpreted differently at different times by different people, or does it mean verses that are derivative from the principles? So in other words, contextual and contingent verses. This is an old debate that in modern Islam you don't find reignited that often. In fact, I find a lot of even PhD students that don't even realize that that's a serious debate within dealing with the Quranic revelation. And why is it important? Because it affects everything. If, in fact, what the Quran is talking about when it refers to ayat that are Kitab, the heart of the book, as Quranic verses that give you the foundational ethical principles, and then Quranic verses that are contingent and contextual. So in other words, you cannot even approach these verses without understanding the history, and then enter into the issue of whether these Quranic verses continue to be relevant to different contexts and so on. That's one approach, and it's in our modern age, it's a very controversial approach for most modern Muslims. If the Quranic verses rather is talking about verses of clear meaning and verses of ambiguous meaning, it raises very different types of questions. Why would there be verses of clear meaning and precise meaning? And we know from our modern knowledge of semiotics and language that a language is constantly an evolving and changing thing. Language is not static. Language is like a living organism. So when even we use a word like iman, if you think with our modern consciousness, iman ignites the same neurons in our brain that it ignited in someone that lived centuries ago, that's delusional. Yeah. Our imagery, the way our psychology is built is very different. So why you cannot approach issues not just with the darb verse, not just the verse of beating, but verses like the qatl, but it tells you to cut the hands. For our modern psychology, the impact of a cutting verse is very different than the psychology of someone who, the idea of seeing things being cut, heads, limbs, and so on, was just a part and parcel of life itself in the medieval period. What troubles me about the beating verse is not just its ambiguity, because the word daraba itself, in its historical progression in Arabic semiotics. So, when we say darabtu fi tariq, it doesn't mean that I beat the road. It means that I started traveling on the road, right? Or if you say darab al-fahl al-baqar, it doesn't mean the ox beat the cow. It means the ox had sex with the cow, copulated the cow. So, and in fact, till even modern age, Moroccans still use the word daraba to refer to sex, to intercourse. So that is why someone like Ahmad Ali in his own interpretation of the Quran, or his own translation of the Quran, he said that it's not even, darba is not referring to beating, it's referring to abstaining from sex and returning and having sex. Now, in my writing, I disagreed with that. But can I exclude that as a possibility? No, I can't. You could be possibly right. But I don't think, for a variety of reasons, that that's accurate. I think that, in fact, what troubles me about the verse is actually something rather procedural. And that is the reference about فَضْرِبُوهُنْ. No, it's both linguistic and procedural. فَضْرِبُوهُنْ it's which beat them. Grammatically, it refers to collectively beat them. Not individually beat them, but collectively beat them. Second, there is a procedural issue, and that is the reference to darb comes in, if you read the chapter, in a very odd place in relation to the very important reference about tahkim, where you actually, she picks a representative and the husband picks a representative, and then they resolve the conflict. So how could it be that you have the reference to darb progressively comes to after the verse of tahkim, which, how could you say, try to arbitrate the conflict and then have a reference about beating later on? So anyway, so I started a journey of looking at the traditions that surround the beating the verse. And as I explained there, and may Allah give me the energy to publish the full research, because I only took the snippets of the research. We know that there were several procedures in Islamic, or in the early Islamic community, such as a procedure for holding women confined to home confinement for certain sexual improprieties. It's a long subject, but anyway, there were several procedures that I found evidence for in a variety of historical narratives, which did not survive in later schools of jurisprudence. In other words, they popped up in the early legalistic opinions like Kitab al-Asl by Shaybani, but they did not survive beyond Shaybani. And among those that relating to Ayat is several references that Ayat al-Darb had nothing to do with addressing husbands vis-a-vis wives, but actually was addressing a penalty, a communal penalty akin to house arrest. In other words, that it was referring to what in Kitab al-Asl Shaybani says 10 lashes administered after for particular sexual improprieties. What type of sexual improprieties? There's actually a lot of discussion about it, whether it was lesbianism or something short of zina, but sex engaged in what we call heavy petting in our society today, in American society, heavy petting in public. That there was a report that the woman was actually had their breasts exposed and a guy fondling them and they were kissing, so that was an occasion for reputation for good woman, that it was then a penalty of 10 lashes, and it gets into a lot of stuff. Now, what fascinated me as a jurist is that it didn't survive in the Madan, in the later Madan. And Ayat al-Darb suddenly becomes addressed to husbands, and that procedural process that I find in the earlier reports is absent. Now, that changes the context completely, because if it's referring to an abrogated legal process that addressed a public issue that met Muslims in Medina, then it's not addressing husbands and wives at all. Do you follow what I'm saying?
So you're saying the ayah is not talking about the context of spousal relations?
Not, if that investigation is true, then it's not even talking about husbands and wives. It's not even addressing husbands.
Even though it says, and if you fear nushuz from your spouse.
Yes, but it raises the issue of nashaz. What is a nashaz? Later, commentators said it's ma'asiyah, that you don't obey your husband. And of course, then you get all these reports that are, but if nushuz, if it is talking about you as a community fear the nushuz of certain women, and it's talking about sexual improprieties committed by married women, and it, as the report that I found in these traditions says that the complaint must be brought by a husband, but the penalty is not applied by a husband. So in other words, the complaint is not about your wife disobeying. The complaint is about your wife fooling around with someone else. And in public, as the report says. And then you file a complaint, and there is a judicial process, and the penalty is that process of darb. That changes the entire ballgame. But then it becomes a question of, like a lot of the madhahib, because remember that a lot of the madhahib, early madhahib, became extinct. Four that survived, the four Sunni ones, and the 2 or 3 Ja'fari ones, or Shia ones, they're the ones that survived. But we have tens of madhahib that expired and died. So, what, as I explain in these chapters, is that as a scholar, I cannot simply pass over these reports and accept the later patriarchal interpretations about the discretion of a husband to inflict the punishment for granted. Because then it becomes a judicial process. And then it raises many different other questions, like a lot of other judicial processes that didn't live in the later developed Sunni schools or Shia schools.
I'm sorry, we have to wrap it up soon, but I would like to add one quick point before we have to close for the night. You may have heard of Lahd Bakhtiar's The Sublime Quran. I would recommend that as a good resource as well, in addition to the wonderful writings that Dr. Abou El Fadl has written, which essentially suggests that the most merciful interpretation of that verse is called for because we're followers of the Sunnah. Therefore, the Prophet never beat his wives. He left. That was his example, and in that context, she reads it as someone who's left. And I'm also sort of following Ibn Arabi here. He also has this hermeneutics of mercy, where everywhere you find something in the Quran, and because the words and the phrases are polyvalent, they have multiple meanings, we can, and I think we should, choose the most merciful interpretation.
Let me just what says this? There are traditions, in fact, that you find that where you have fascinating traditions where they say that if one of us would raise their hand to their wife, that they would be ostracized, not just the person. This is attributed to several companions, or they say that if any of us would beat our wives, we would be ostracized, and our children and our grandchildren would be ostracized. Fascinating. Because why does ostracism take if in fact beating your wife is acceptable? Another that says that, which hadith attributed to the Prophet, I've actually investigated the Isnad of this hadith for years, that the worst of you are those who beat your wives, and the best of you are those who never raise a hand to your wives. There is even a juristic opinion that didn't survive into the later Sunni madhab, that it was in some of the extinct madhab, if you beat your wife, it became an automatic presumptive divorce that your wife would have to explicitly negate, which I found it extremely fascinating, that if you actually beat your wife, then all she needs to do is that you need to admit that you actually beat her, and that's an automatic divorce, and then she would have to forgive the beating. And then another opinion that I also found fascinating is that if you beat your wife, then she actually has the ability to force you to pay a gharama. That again, it's an opinion that didn't survive in the Sunni madhab. So how could your wife go to a judge, have you pay a tax or penalty for striking her, or even if there's an injury, full compass, a diya, and so on. So my point is that historically, the least we can say is that it deserves far more investigation than we granted. I am not, in our day and age, I'm not willing to leave it at the mercy or good manners of husbands. Because I know that a lot of husbands are SOBs and they'll abuse it. And we know something about power in the modern age is that if people have power, they abuse it. So it is in my interest to invest in the thing that we all ignore, the manuscripts. The manuscripts. And I know that you guys want to conclude, but this is the appeal that I always make. You want to save the Islamic civilization, you want to answer a lot of questions, you want to start answering questions out of the brackets that patriarchy and colonialism has given us, save the manuscripts and study the manuscripts. Because what I have found in Islamic manuscripts, the things that are not published, the things that come out of Senegal and Timbuktu and the most far out islands, and even the manuscripts that I found coming out of Egypt. Even the manuscripts of freaking eBay. I mean, eBay right now, so we talk, there are manuscripts that I'm going to have a heart attack if I can't buy it. I'm not going to be able to buy, so I might as well, do my ada and have a funeral, because the money is not there. And these manuscripts will be bought. And I'll tell you, one of the amazing things is that Israel gobbles up Islamic manuscripts left and right. I mean, this is not an ishab. Ask your question, ask yourself why. Why is Tel Aviv University investing freaking millions of dollars in buying up Islamic manuscripts?
I'm so sorry.
So, I promise. So, like a lot of things, the answer to unlocking mysteries of interpretation and history is more knowledge, more investigation, and the modesty of saying, I don't know. At this point, I don't have an answer. I don't have a fulfilled answer. Okay, so yeah.
Thank you so much. Grace, thank you both so much. Thank you all for joining.